Nice to see. Oh, great. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Michelle Sandberg, and I'm a pediatrician at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center and an assistant clinical professor at Stanford University School of Medicine. And I'm chairing the SAFE National Advisory Board. And I was one of the original board members of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, which was formed in response to the Sandy Hook Elementary School shootings and is the largest grassroots organization working on gun safety legislation in the country. And I'm really honored to be here to moderate this event for SAFE today. I'm looking forward to speaking with Dr. Brian Williams, an Air Force veteran, trauma surgeon in Dallas, former congressional health policy advisor, recent candidate for Congress, and a member of SAFE's National Board of Directors. That's a lot, super impressive. I know everyone's so excited to hear from him today. And he's going to be talking to us today about the critical shift from federal to state policies in firearm injury prevention work. And we're going to be discussing some of the themes from his best-selling memoir, The Bodies Keep Coming, Dispatches from a Black Trauma Surgeon on Racism, Violence, and How We Heal. We'll be able to discuss the intersectionality of race, racism, and healthcare, as well as the broader future of the gun violence epidemic. We have some questions lined up that I'm going to ask Dr. Williams, but we will also give time for our audience to ask questions at the end. So please feel free to submit your questions in the chat. And Allison, who is SAFE's executive director, will keep an eye on the chat. She's waving. She'll keep an eye on the chat. And if you haven't read Dr. Williams' book, I strongly recommend you order a copy directly from the publisher. The link for that is going to be in the chat. And we have a promo code, SAFE2025. I personally read this book recently, absolutely loved it. I was telling Dr. Williams I had trouble putting it down. So I read it in one sitting, basically, because I loved it so much. It was really a page turner. So highly recommend it. So to get started, one of the things from Dr. Williams' book that I really took to heart was his encouragement to share our own stories in firearm injury work. And because stories are so critical, sometimes the statistics can be overwhelming and they can feel like they can numb us or paralyze us. And stories are a way for us to connect and remind us why we're all here on a Tuesday night when there's a lot of other things that we all could be doing. And telling our stories helps us become better advocates for ourselves and our patients. And so before we meet Dr. Williams and hear his story, I just want to briefly share a little bit about my story and how I started working on the gun violence epidemic after medical school. So I'd been practicing pediatrics for about 10 years when the Sandy Hook shooting happened. And my middle child was the same age as those kids in the classroom. So it really hit me hard. And I started educating myself about the gun violence epidemic, and I was really shocked at the magnitude of the problem. And I was confused as to why I had received no training on gun violence in medical school or residency. At that time, firearms were the second leading cause of death in the pediatric patient population that I work with, behind automobile accidents. And so it seemed obvious to me that physicians, nurses, healthcare professionals need education on this topic. Since then, firearms have overtaken automobile accidents as the leading cause of death in kids age 1 to 18 in our country. So I joined Moms Demand Action in the days following the Sandy Hook shooting and joined the founding board, and had my first experience doing advocacy work. In addition to doing some advocacy work for gun safety legislation, I started focusing on education and started teaching grand rounds and classes to medical students and residents about the role of the physician in combating this public health crisis. So that's my story. And I now want to thank Dr. Williams for agreeing to join us at one of SAFE's 2 national events this year. And so I want to start with the first question. So my first question is, as a trauma surgeon, how do you reconcile the fact that you took an oath to treat all patients, regardless of their race or ethnicity, to the best of your abilities, but at times you face patients who openly hold racist beliefs and values? Some of the stories in your book about patient care For example, the patient with a swastika tattoo seemed incredibly challenging to me.
Dr. Sandberg, first, I want to say it's a pleasure to meet you and honored to be part of this event. This with SAFE. This is doing organization doing great work, so I'm proud to be part of it. But to answer your question directly, I think like a lot of things good and bad in our lives that we figure out as adults, it goes back to childhood. So I'm a military brat. My dad was a career Air Force enlisted uh, um, servant, public servant. And so because of that, we were allowed to move around a lot. Every couple of years we moved to a different base with my dad's new assignments. So that meant seeing different parts of the country, but also living internationally. We lived in Japan for a while, had a hardship tour in Hawaii. But during that time, I was also socializing with other kids who were having the same experience as I was. Their parents were serving, came from all different sorts of backgrounds. And so I got to see a lot of parts of the country, different cultural parts of the country, international exposure, and growing up with kids who were having the same experience. So I recognize now that I was developing this sense of inclusivity and diversity as a child that has continued with me as an adult. So looking back, I can see that the roots and the seeds were planted way back then, although I didn't think about it in that way. Uh, so moving forward, I served in the military. I went to the Air Force Academy. Again, they take a bunch of us from around the country, shave our heads. We go through the same training and go out to serve. So again, it's like, what does a mission require us to do? Our ethnic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, political backgrounds were secondary to working together to accomplishing the mission. Take that same sort of ethos into medicine, where we take an oath to treat everyone with the same sort of dignity and high level care that we expect for our own family members. So when the patient that you mentioned that had the swastika tattoo, that didn't impact how I looked at him as a human being when it came time to treat him when he's near death from a gunshot wound, right? We as doctors and clinicians and nurses, anyone that takes care of patients, have to recognize and accept our shared humanity if we're going to make this country a better place. So I think those roots for that sort of ethos were planted as a child, just sort of internalized through military service, and I brought that with me into my service as a doctor.
Thank you. So I think this segues into, if you could articulate, like, what core beliefs do you hold as a doctor and a human being that you think help you navigate those types of difficult patient provider interactions?
I try to lead this life where I just try to recognize our shared humanity, all of our shared humanity. Everyone has a story. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I do get upset with some of the things I hear and see. Uh, but I try to stop and whatever movies playing in my head, whatever recordings going on in my head, stop that and say, okay, people I do not know all have a story. And I have taken this oath to be a healer. So what I want to do is use the experience and the skills that I'm fortunate to have to put good out to the world, right? Take care of patients when they're sick, work with a team that is committed to doing the same, and set all those other things that differentiate us aside. Because in the end, each of us has someone who cares about us. Each of us has goals for ourselves and our family. And if I can be part of ensuring that anybody can achieve the best versions of themselves, that's how I want to live my life and work and do my work as a surgeon.
And how do you overcome the mental and physical toll that it takes on you to address this issue?
I think I've gotten used to living with this sort of baseline fatigue for a long time. Like just especially in trauma surgery, you just have these weird hours and long shifts, and it's a demanding specialty. Um, I try to do the things that we know what you do as doctors, but we don't always do so well. I try to get enough sleep. I'm committed to getting some form of physical activity every day. I try to eat right and maintain my social circles. I know what I need to do, right? It's just a matter of ensuring that I am doing that. So I'm really, now that, especially now I'm in my, in my 50s now, I'm really focused on maintaining my physicality because I want to still be mobile, 25, 30 years from now. The psychological part, that's really important, I believe. It's just being around people and having people that you can go to and talk to about what it means to be in this profession, particularly taking care of gun violence victims on a regular basis, taking care of people who do not have access to healthcare on a regular basis. And what does that mean for their lives? There's a certain level of, I don't know, moral injury, knowing that the system sometimes feels like it's conspired against us to do what we are trained to do, what we want to do. We want to provide the best sort of care for everybody, but sometimes it seems like it's impossible to do so because the system is not designed to provide the best level of care for the greatest number of people.
Yeah, thank you. I find that really interesting. I think, a lot of people think about diet and exercise and sleep when they think about their mental well-being, but I found it really interesting, a lot of data coming out recently about the importance of social connections. Some people saying that if you had to choose between smoking a pack of cigarettes a day and having no social connections, being isolated, you actually will live longer smoking a pack of cigarettes a day with healthy
Really?
social connections. Yes. So there's just a lot, I think, with this mental health epidemic that we're facing in this country. I think there's some renewed attention placed on the importance of social connection. So I just found it really interesting that you pointed to that in how you overcome the challenges, in addition to, I think, the stuff that we normally think of. I think that all of us need to be making sure we're keeping up our relationships in order to have
Right.
thrive and have longevity, actually.
And to be fair, Dr. Sandberg, I'm a loner by nature, so I don't need a whole lot of social connections to actually fill up my tank. It doesn't take much to make me at least meet the minimum requirements to achieve those social connections.
Right. You can be an introvert and still keep up
Yes,
with
yes,
social connections, for sure.
exactly.
Good. Well, next question. One of the core themes of your memoir is about grief and anger and how these emotions can manifest in one's life over time. To what extent do you think one can use grief and anger to define their motivations to be a better doctor, advocate, and ally? We'll start with there, and I have part two.
Yeah, so I mean, a theme throughout the book is this lifelong internalized anger uh, that I've had, and the roots of that. A lot of discussions, talk about therapy in the book as well. So we maybe get to that later. But for me, for a long time, I used that anger. I channeled that into just success. I'm going to get the best grades. I'm going to graduate top of my class. I am going to work harder than any other resident. I'm going to read all the books. It's all about achievements. The
Mhm.
the 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 plaques on the walls and just becoming the best uh, surgeon and doctor I could be. Which we do get rewarded for that, right? There's an expectation for us to achieve a certain level of excellence because we are responsible for the health and well-being of strangers. So that can be rewarded. Now, there has to be some balance, right? Uh, I recognize that even though I was channeling it into something healthy, I was not doing it in the most healthy way, right? Because I wasn't acknowledging my the roots of my anger, or that I was even angry, right? If you had asked me that, I would deny that. I'm like, of course, I'm just fine. Once I recognized that and addressed that, actually made me I think, a better doctor, better husband, better father, better friend, social connections. All those things came together once I was able to channel that into something good. Like recognize it, acknowledge it, name it, and then channel that into doing what I can to um, promote to, goodness to the world. Just be a good doctor, take care of my patients, and interact with my family and friends in a much more healthy and um, legitimate, honest, open way.
Yeah, I think that's great advice to the whole audience about needing to recognize and understand sort of the root of the emotion as the first step towards addressing it. So I think that's just great life advice in general. Um, and so in those moments of grief and anger, how do you at the same time make room for compassion and empathy to come through as well? Because in your book, there's a lot of situations where you understandably feel the grief and the anger, but you find a way to find, to feel empathy and compassion. How do you do both at the same time?
So I guess to be fair, I didn't always do that, right? And in the book, there's sort of this journey where I get to that point. For the longest time, it was this complete dissociation. It was, I am trained to do this job. I'm trained to respond to a trauma activation, take care of a gunshot victim, go to the operating room, and dissociate myself from those emotions and just focus on just falling back on my training and doing what I'm trained to do. That you can achieve incredible success just by doing that, right? But there is a personal and psychological cost to doing that if you're just completely dissociated all the time. So uh, now I'm much more in tune with the roots of those emotions and how they impact me as I approach my patients. And just one thing differently I've done, and even after having pronounced hundreds of people dead due to gun violence. It wasn't until just a few years ago where I actually began to just stop at the time of the death and have the entire team to say, just have a moment of silence to honor this person whose life was taken uh, from them. And that's that small thing that kind of reconnects me in that moment. And I think the team as well, that what we do is incredibly valuable, uh, and important. We should be proud of the work we do, that we can be with people in health, in sickness, and in death.
Yeah, it's really sacred work. I agree. Um, so my next question is, it's clear that structural racism is the crux of the massive healthcare disparities that continue to exist in our country. For our audience, what role do you think medical students, physicians, or anyone working in the public health space has in advocating for racially equitable healthcare solutions? And where would a person who's interested start? Because it feels overwhelming at times.
Right.
So, any advice I think the audience would really appreciate.
I feel our roles in healthcare is central to addressing that, educating and advocating. And really, if we address this issue of structural racism, we can solve a lot of issues in this country, a lot of them. But we'll focus on healthcare for now. Students and the younger trainees that are coming, in my experience is that they're coming in with this expectation that they'll be good clinicians, but also there's a social contract. Well, they are advocating for these greater social issues beyond just becoming uh, great doctors. So there's an expectation that that those are one and the same, they're not separate. So the education has to start there. We can start with in medical school just talking about the history of racism within medical training and just explain like we are here where we are now with all these medical advances because of things that have happened in the past where we abused people who were unable to speak for themselves, did not have the agency over their own bodies. There's nothing wrong with that, right? We can talk about what happened in the past, which is why we are here now to prepare for making a better future. And there's things that are happening. For example, we've talked about obstetrics. We've talked about J. Marion Sims and how he, performed operations on enslaved women without anesthesia, like barbaric operations where they were held down screaming while he performed pretty barbaric operations. He's known as the father of obstetrics. Many instruments that we still use today were developed by him. Like we can connect those two things and say, listen, this what happened, and this what's happened in the past. Uh, we talked about that there is still a lot of current research that relies on using subjects, I use that quote in quotes, who are from racially segregated neighborhoods that are enrolled in studies they may not even know about it, right? Studies that their population level studies that they're enrolled in, or they may be going to public hospitals where they don't have the insurance, so they're uninsured. They get enrolled in these studies. So understand that there is a lot happening to advance medicine that relies on the exploitation of marginalized populations, racial and ethnic minorities, and it doesn't do a disservice to talk about that history. So education is one. We talked about advocacy. We are some of the most trusted people in the country. Those of us that work in healthcare, that the white coat brings credibility. So we have stories that few other people can tell. So we can talk about what it is to take care of our patients, but also bring the credibility of understanding how to translate statistics and research for the lay person to hear. So advocacy and taking our experience to the public can make a huge difference beyond just within medicine. People want to do research, you can affect a lot of people. Advocacy is the same way. So lean back on your experience and expertise to make a difference. Education and advocate, easy places to start. Join SAFE is one of them.
I agree. Thank you. That's a great list. I think that's really helpful. Um, so my next question, as you know, and as our audience in medical school and residency and beyond knows, exhaustion and burnout are huge problems in the physician workforce today. And especially after the pandemic, I think this issue is getting more attention, but I don't think that we have seen a lot of solutions quite yet. So, what advice do you have for physicians who are facing fatigue, moral injury, as you mentioned before, and traumatic experiences in seeking help?
Yeah. So when when I look at burnout, I heard someone talk about this. It's beyond. It goes beyond just the hours and the fatigue, but it's also when the work you're doing is malaligned with your values. That can lead to burnout. And I separate more burnout from moral injury because burnout can be just from working long hours, the administrative workload that we have as physicians on top of caring for patients, all those things that detract from having the good work-life integration. People call it balance. I call it work-life integration. So things that challenge that can lead to burnout. So those things are under our control to a certain extent. And then you mentioned the moral injury, which that's what I'm kind of most focused on because that's what really impacted me. Where I felt that the work I was doing was not aligned with my ethical values, right? For example, I'm taking care of gun violence victims. Our team may take care of them, save their life. They may leave the hospital, but in the end, they go back to the same environment that placed them at risk of injury. And there's a lot of recidivism as well. So how do you address those systemic issues beyond the hospital? And the moral injury can come from just feeling helpless in that, but we are not helpless, right? We just talked about ways that we can advocate. We talked about ways that we can educate about these issues and how we in healthcare with the credibility can be involved in creating systemic solutions to many of the issues that are plaguing us right now.
Yeah, thank you. Um, so so the media often does not portray gun violence against people of color with the same level of urgency as they do for white people. So interestingly for me, I, this issue was brought to my attention by the Sandy Hook shooting, which obviously got attention because of the age of the children and the quantity, the number of people dead. But I think another reason it got attention was because it was in a Connecticut school and so many white children were injured. Um, how do we change this? Like, how do we build a sustainable dialogue between the media and all communities that are affected by gun violence in order to better address this complicated issue?
That was one of the main goals of writing the book. And one of the things that drives me every single day is how do we elevate the voices, particularly of Black communities where there is endemic violence and Black children that are suffering from gun violence. The stats are just staggering, right? Within 24 hours of this session, half of the firearm homicides will be young Black men. Uh, just National Suicide Month, right? So we talk about firearm suicides. You mentioned that firearms are the number 1 cause of death for children, but firearm suicides are the number 1 cause of death for children. Over half of children die from firearm suicides. That's gone up by 40% in the last 10 years. But for Black children, it's increased by about 250%. That's just an incredible increase. So the racial disparities exist in so many ways. So what I wanted to do was just how do we elevate all voices in this gun violence debate or discussion, we should say, because this is the many different types of gun violence, right? Intimate partner violence, mass shootings, preventable shootings, but we also have to elevate all of the voices. So I mean also elevating the victims and survivors who are racial and ethnic minorities, but also make sure that we use them as messengers to talk about this because the solutions may be different. And you mentioned Sandy, which was kind of an inflection point in this, but most school shootings that are lethal occur on majority Black school grounds. There's a lot to address here. We can discuss why that is, and I'm sure there are people who have cynical answers to why that is the case. But again, this goes to addressing the systemic issues, structural racism, and by addressing that, we can save a lot of lives for everybody. Everybody will benefit from doing that. So we need to elevate those voices, elevate the messengers, and look at this as a holistic solution to all these firearm deaths.
Yeah, I agree, and I would say in my experience in the advocacy space, I think it is so important to have diverse voices and have different experiences and viewpoints represented in order to be effective in this space. So I very much agree with that. And interestingly, I think there's a lot of disparity in what gets attention in the media, in addition to white people being killed by guns getting more attention than minority groups. I think there's not enough attention, to your point, on the suicide rate, that over 50% of gun deaths in this country are actually suicides. I think a lot of people are unaware of that. Or the fact that while mass shootings get a lot of attention, the really the daily gun violence is where we see the most gun deaths by far in this country. It's that
Mhm.
day-to-day gun violence. And so we need to, I think, elevate those stories as well, in addition to the mass shootings and the school shootings that get so much attention. Um,
Yeah, I think like you're saying, like any death due to gun violence is one too many, right? Any preventable death from gun violence, that's one too many. And the
right,
mass shootings are less than 0.5% of all firearm deaths annually in this country. Um, they generate a lot of attention, but the solutions they're beyond that, right? There's so many different solutions we need to address to save like tens of thousands of lives per year.
right. And these are all preventable deaths because they're firearm deaths. These are not people dying from cancer or heart. These are preventable deaths. So,
Right.
um, okay. So next question. In 2020, as we talked about earlier, firearms became the leading cause of death in the pediatric population in this country, overtaking automobile accidents. And yet many medical schools and residencies provide little or no education about gun violence. Um, I teach a class on the gun violence epidemic to the Stanford pediatric residents, and many of them are unaware that firearms are the leading cause of mortality in their patient population. So, what can we do to raise awareness and education, specifically among healthcare providers, about gun violence and the critical importance of addressing topics such as secure storage with patients and their families? And I know that's one of the reasons that you and I are working with SAFE, because SAFE
Right.
is one of its focuses is on education. But I'm curious, what you think we can do in addition to joining SAFE and working with SAFE to raise awareness and education among physicians in particular.
Yeah, that's an interesting dichotomy, right? Since you and I work in this space all the time, when we find out that most people don't know, especially in healthcare, what like these stats you just mentioned, it's shocking to us, right? There's some cognitive dissonance there that How can you not know that? But we're in this all the time, so we have to accept that. And this 2020 statistic is a prime example of that, right? 2020, number one cause of death for children and teens was firearms. Reported in JAMA, became big news. They're still reporting it to this day, right? They talk about that inflection point. However, in the decade prior, what was the number one cause of firearm? What was the number one cause of death for Black children and teens? It was firearms for the
Right.
10 years prior. We've been screaming about that, right? And again, was not getting the attention it deserved. It was also the messengers were not there. And wasn't until Sandy Hook where people really started to, okay, let's look at this issue. And still, in 2020, it was there for a minute, and then it kind of faded to the background. So this should be part of the curriculum. This is part of public health. This is part of saving lives, right? We have to accept the fact that this is also a political issue as well. So that gives some challenges when we want to educate our trainees and doctors about this issue. But I'll make the last point about this. Trauma surgeons, emergency medicine doctors, I'd say pediatricians as well, we get a lot of attention when it comes to gun violence because of what we do, right? But it doesn't matter which specialty you're in, you will probably come across someone who has been impacted by gun violence. If it's intimate partner violence, if you're the gynecologist or the family practitioner, they may cross your paths, right? Um, Children, parents, we talked about the mass shootings and day-to-day gun violence, suicides. Like no matter what your specialty is, at some point, someone that could be a victim of gun violence may cross your path. That's why it's incumbent upon all of us to have some base level of education, how to recognize the signs and take care of the victims and survivors.
Yep, thank you. So my next question is a really hard question, and I think it's probably one the audience is really eager to hear an answer to. So you've had experience with the gun violence and firearm injury epidemic, both on the front lines as a trauma surgeon and also as a congressional policy advisor. So given this experience, what do you think are some realistic strategies to reduce gun violence in this country? And specifically, how healthcare providers can make a difference in this public health crisis?
Yeah, so I think from a policy standpoint, there's three, which is universal background checks, raising the minimum age to at least 21 to purchase a firearm, and safe storage. Those three things, evidence-based, they're supported by the majority of Americans, regardless of whether they own guns or not, and their political affiliation. Those three things are supported by most and evidence-based that will save a lot of lives. Um, I talk about this from this standpoint of someone who's cared for gun violence victims. I've also had members of my family taken due to gun violence, so it's also personal to me. And from a congressional health policy advisor standpoint, you mentioned Sandy Hook. I worked as Senator Chris Murphy's health care advisor when we passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act a couple of years ago after Uvalde. So we've seen that we can make big moves to save lives through federal policy. We're going to get into how that's changing later. But for us in healthcare, how we get involved is, again, we have the stories that few others can tell. We can talk about what it's like to care for children and adults who have been injured by gun violence, what it means to talk to their families and tell someone about the death of their loved one. We've done the research. You can explain these evidence-based policies. So you can start just by, uh, you know, giving testimony at your state legislatures about this, joining grassroots organizations, getting involved with your national medical organizations that are involved in policy and advocacy if this is an issue that they are addressing. There are so many avenues where we can get involved with our experience and background that can make a difference to promote gun gun safety legislation that's evidence-based and supported by most Americans.
Thank you. I think it's really important just to highlight what you said about physicians having stories that are impactful, because I do think for our audience, for anyone in the healthcare field, Dr. Williams is right. We are the people that have the stories to share, whether it's with our elected representatives or whether it's on social media to spread awareness with friends and family. And I think that is such a unique position that we're in that we should not forget or undervalue. And it really does give us a unique role. And when I'm teaching my class at Stanford, I talk to the residents about this, that they have a role as clinicians to their patients and educators to their patients, but they also are trusted voices in their community, and that they can use that to really spread awareness and hopefully impact policy change. So I really like this emphasis today on stories, and I know that's in your book as well. So
And can I add to that real quick, Dr.
of
Sandberg,
course,
is
yes.
that in healthcare, you can do this in a way that's nonpartisan, right? You can bring that credibility and talk about this issue as a public health issue in a nonpartisan way. Now, whether it gets, you know, politicized from whoever you're talking to is a different story, but you can bring the credibility of someone who just wants to take care of patients and save lives. Here is my experience. Here is the data. You know, I'm probably tainted now since I ran for Congress and had to choose a political party, but still, I'm trying to do the best I can to end this epidemic. But many of you, you can come with a fresh slate.
I think that's a really good point. And I think that another thing that I think we've all learned, anyone in this space, is that you can approach the advocacy from a non-political bipartisan position. And so there are many gun owners, Republicans, libertarians, people of all affiliations that are tired of the gun violence epidemic, and they're interested in partnering on common sense gun safety measures. And just as physicians, we can encourage our patients to register to vote in a nonpartisan way. We're not asking them to register and vote for a particular party or a particular candidate, but we can say, please register to vote. Use this is a civic duty. We can do the same, I think, in the gun violence space. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a really good reminder to the audience. I think some of the themes I've been hearing are the importance of storytelling and how we can do this in a nonpartisan, non-political way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So another question, and then we'll wrap up so in a few minutes we can have time for audience questions. In the policy world, there's been a lot of talk about focusing on policy improvements at the state and local level. Given the federal climate and how hard it is, and in the wake of the Sandy Hook shooting, I was personally so devastated when we were unable to pass universal background checks, which you mentioned earlier is sort of the foundation of any gun safety, gun violence reduction strategy. So even after Sandy Hook, we were unable to pass universal background checks at the federal level. Given the difficult federal climate, do you think it's pointless for healthcare providers to advocate for federal laws in firearm injury prevention? Do you think we'll know when the time is right to focus on federal laws again?
It is not pointless, and the time is now. It's never stop. Okay, and here's why: we have to accept that anything that happens at the federal level happens at a glacial pace, right? These things move very slowly, years. Look, we had the assault weapons ban in. I'm using these as examples, not as not politicizing this, but just as examples, okay? We had the assault weapons ban in 96, 97, and then it was another 25 years later that we had the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act passed. But during that time, people didn't stop working trying to pass more gun safety laws. You know, Moms Demand was doing their work a decade before that was that bill was passed. So we continue to do the work because there are always others out there that want the same thing as you. Right now, we have gridlock at the federal level, right? So we can expect zero gun safety laws passed in the current climate, and potentially more permissive gun laws passed in the federal current climate. That's why we still need to do the work at the federal level, but also this is more important for what you can do at the state level as well, right? So our system of government allows states to make their own laws, not just legislatively, but also in the judiciary, like state Supreme Courts can interpret laws uh, as well. So you can still do plenty of work at the local and state level to promote gun safety, despite what's happening at the federal level. But still, we continue to do the work at the federal level because you never know what will happen to make things change. The example I will give, and then we'll move on to the next question, is when Uvalde, that tragedy happened, we were not working on gun safety as a major issue in Congress. Even when I was serving in Senator Murphy's office, I was working on other things related to healthcare. Gun violence was, not even in the top 10 of the things that were on in my portfolio to work on. But then Uvalde happened, and suddenly everything shifted. Right, the entire the congressional agenda was focused on, okay, we now have to do something about gun safety. So you have to be prepared when the opportunity may present itself to make a difference. That's why you continue to do the work nonstop, even when it feels like you're not going to make any progress, because you want to keep the foundation there, keep your group together that's working on this, so when the time comes, you can take advantage of making a difference.
Thank you. That's a great point and a very hopeful message. And I think you're right. Like, while decades passed in between federal legislation, had people stopped doing the work in all those years, we would not have been ready after the Uvalde shooting to pass the first piece of federal legislation in decades. So I think that's a really, really good point and a
Yeah.
motivating thing for the audience. Thank you. And then last question on our end, and then we'll open it up to the audience. It's obviously can be really hard to get things done in Washington, D.C. As you said, it moves at a glacial pace, and it can be hard to get things done in states like where you reside, like in Texas. So can you just give the audience just an idea of what you think can be done at a city or county level in some of those more challenging areas and states?
Yeah. So there are things you can do to share your expertise and your stories, whether it be through writing an op-ed about an issue that gets to the local paper that may lead to you getting an interview on the local NPR station or one of your TV stations to help spread this word. Also getting involved with grassroots organizations such as your local Moms Demand, SAFE. There are plenty of other options out there where you can get involved, and they are eager to have the input of those of us in healthcare to address these issues. If you could think about it, there is a way for you to get your message out. And also, we now live in an era where getting our message out is rather democratized, right? If you're savvy using social media, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, you have a means of getting the message out to promote gun safety. Um, so choose there's a number of options, op-eds, media, social media, getting involved in grassroots, and also just, keeping your local officials accountable. Follow city council, look at their agenda. If they're talking about school safety, gun safety, make a public comment or show up to give testimony.
That's great. Thank you. That's great advice. So we're going to take some questions in the chat from our audience. And we're also putting a link in the chat for you to share your story with SAFE. So if you feel comfortable sharing your story with SAFE, we'd be honored to share it on our website in our stories page. Okay, I'm going to get in and look at some of the questions from the chat now. Okay, first question for Dr. Williams from a medical student in our audience who is also residing in Texas. The question is, I'm really curious, what methods have you seen success with in persuading individual patients to practice gun safety and in persuading for legislative change in favor of gun safety? How did your tactics, methods change when living in Chicago?
Oh yeah, so I just spent a few years in Chicago. We opened up a new trauma center on the south side of Chicago, which I'm sure many in the audience recognize as one of the areas in the country that has a significant amount of endemic gun violence. When I'm talking to people about gun safety, gun violence prevention, I'm always considering my audience, like who am I speaking to, one-on-one or a group, and what is their background. I'm trying to put myself in their shoes, and I approach this from the aspect I want to just save lives from this preventable uh, means of death. I use my experience as a trauma surgeon, having cared for victims and survivors of gun violence. If I use my stories as someone who's had family members taken from them due to gun violence, I need to talk about the research I've done and publications I've done on gun violence prevention. I will bring that in, and I've worked with a lot of people who are gun owners that do want to promote gun safety. So uh, learning how they approach this and trying to incorporate that language into how I interact with other people is how I improve my skills to try to interact with a diverse group of people when it comes to preventing gun violence. Uh, what I don't do or try not to do is be accusatory, make someone feel bad for how they may think or feel or what they do. Just feel like, what is the common interest here? Is like we're going to save lives, and it's not always easy. We get that. Here, you probably have a self-selected audience that is supportive of all this, but where I worked, that has not always been the case. Particularly when I was working on the Hill, working to get gun safety legislation passed. That was certainly not the case. And of course, the student lives in Texas. You know how it is in Texas. So we have some work to do here, but there are a lot of grassroots organizations doing great work.
Great, thank you. Okay, the next question I see is how should military physicians be engaged in the assault weapons debate? They know the damage that these weapons create, and is this appropriate also for the average citizen?
So I think being a military doctor gives you added credibility in this debate. Uh, and, first, I've cared for individuals that have been injured by assault weapons, and the devastation that those do to bodies is something you will never forget. When you're in the military, you have the added credibility of talking about what it is to train on these weapons, to deal with those injuries on a regular basis, and they've done studies of military veterans who most agree, the majority agree that assault weapons should not be in the hands of untrained civilians. So these are things that you, as a military physician, bring to the table. That sort of credibility that it eludes even me. I wasn't in the military. I served in the military, but it's different than being someone like you, I presume, who has probably been deployed to a combat zone or is trained regularly with these weapons to talk about gun safety. So I'd love to see more military physicians out there talking about it. And the ACS does have a military trauma partnership, and I think they are uh, talking about what it means to promote gun safety.
Thank you. And then one last question from the chat. If you're comfortable sharing with us, what was the moment that you knew you had to become an advocate outside of the hospital or clinic for gun violence prevention?
That moment was July 7th, 2016. There was a mass shooting of Dallas police officers at a racial justice protest. If you remember that time period, this was the summer of the election between Clinton and Trump. There were several officer-involved shootings of Black men. There was also the mass shooting at the Orlando Pulse Club about a month before this shooting. And so there was a protest occurring downtown Dallas. I happened to be the trauma surgeon on call that night at the hospital. In fact, it's initially my night off. I switched with my partner, took that shift. 14 police officers were shot, 7 were brought to our hospital, 3 died of their injuries. And it was in the aftermath of that. I still think about this this night every day. It's kind of always with me. But in the aftermath of that, I thought, okay, what I'm doing in the hospital is not enough to end the violence. I need to get involved outside of the hospital. So that was the pivot point in my life. There is Brian Williams before July 7th, 2016, and then Brian Williams after. And I describe all that in the book as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and I encourage the audience to get this book because that story and how you took that experience and grew from it and all this amazing work you're doing since that experience is really just so inspiring to me, and I think will be to others too. So I really want to thank you so much for sharing your experience and your knowledge and wisdom. This was wonderful to hear from you, and we're so honored to have you share your time. Before everyone leaves this event, I'd like everyone to consider supporting SAFE, this amazing organization. We can throw a donation link in the chat. We hope you're inspired enough to make a contribution, and for medical students, can make a recurring $5 a month contribution, because our network of medical students has a power to do a lot of good. So everyone, please spread the word about SAFE, and get involved and help support us. We would love that. And we also hope that you'll order Dr. Williams' book directly from the publisher, or at your local bookstore. And that link is also in the chat, for anyone. And I know this is really difficult. It's a difficult topic for everyone. It's really difficult work. So thank you everyone for taking the time to be here tonight, and a special thank you to Dr. Williams. We so appreciate everything you've done in this space, and for your patients, and for your state, and for this country. Thank you so much.
It's been an honor to be here, and I just want to echo supporting SAFE. I have an opportunity to sit on many boards, and I really limit what I would do. And this is one where I feel is really going to make a difference. So it was an easy yes when I was asked to be part of this mission. So check out the website and support the work that they're doing.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, and please stay in touch with us. Have a good night.